Hi, so now we're going to talk about eyes. Eyes are really, really important in a portrait. They are the thing that communicates the most in the expression. There's a couple of things that you need to pay really close attention to. The first one of which is the catch lights in the eyes, the little reflections from whatever the light source is, a window or a lamp, that just illuminate the pupils. Getting them in the right position can determine where your subject is looking. You need to pay close attention when you're doing the drawing in, and I would, for the same reason, not recommend embossing them in, because as you progress in working through your portrait, you might suddenly notice that they're in the wrong place and you need to try and change them. Just noticing already that one of mine could slightly go up a bit. You won't notice until you start putting the dark of the pupil in around it, exactly whether it looks really wrong at you. With eyes, as with the rest of the skin tone shading, we're just going to work really gently and lightly in layers, building up as we go along. Any of these problems that are noticeable as you go along, then you've got more chance of being able to correct it. So first of all, I'm just going to come in with a slate grey and just really lightly marking the dark area under the eyelid and the outside of this iris. Put a little bit of that grey in the pupil just to define it. And again with the catch lights, same as when we were doing the highlights on the skin, I'm going to try and use a zoning in technique, so I'm not going to go right up to the edges of it. I'm just going to leave it open a little bit at the sides, so we can just slightly alter the shape if needs be. My skin tone now. Just put a bit of the colour in on the surrounding area. Just helps me be able to see how white the whites of the eyes need to be. When you're working from photographs, the whites of the eyes are never really pure white. They won't be the white of the paper. I'll talk about it a little more in a while, but you can see there it's not absolutely white. It's made up of blues and greys. The thing that we're going to preserve as actual white is the catch light in the eye. We want that to be the brightest point really of the whole portrait. You notice in the corner of the eye it's bounded by a light area, like a highlight. We need to try and preserve that, and then it starts to go into the shadow that will define the bridge of the nose. Not paying attention to that can be one of the common problems that lead to eyes looking really flat on a portrait. Because all the time we're working, it's important to remember that they are spheres inside a socket, so it's about trying to get the shading right to show the bone structure around underneath the skin. That'll just help make your eyes seem more realistic. And a bit of brown ochre. Just defining these creases. At this stage I'm not paying any attention to the eyelashes, just concentrating on the underlying skin colour. The eyelashes will be pretty much the last thing that I'll put in once I'm happy with the tone and colour of this eyelid area. I'm going to using a peach. Just putting a bit of texture in here because it's the beginnings of the eyebrows appearing. So I'm just giving it a bit of a rougher stroke. And change to purple now. Then in the very corners of the eyes, I'm just going to use a little bit of pink. This is just the creamy colour that we used right from the start, just to take some of that harsh whiteness off the highlights we had on the skin, so that then we can see by contrast where the white of the highlight in the eye is going to really stand out. I'm going to go back in with that grey. On this photograph, the baby's eyes are very wide open, almost startled expression. Usually you wouldn't be able to see the top part of somebody's iris like that unless they had a very startled expression. Usually it's more like the bottom bit is cut off and the top bit is cut off, and you just see these side edges. And turn to an indigo blue. Just going to come in with raw umber to work over this blue. I'm building the black of the pupil in layers of brown, blue, and then eventually I'll use some red as well. So you can see I'm zoning right into where that catchlight is, preserving the white till I'm absolutely sure it's in the right place. Chip it and take away a little bit at a time till I'm happy with it. Now I'm going to add in a bit of a cast shadow that's going over the iris, cast by the brow bone. Just going to add a bit of purple to the colour of the eyes, and I'm starting to notice that this dark band around the iris is not actually a very even band at all. It's got a very wiggly edge to it, and replicating that is going to make your eye look a lot more natural. Take some of that purple into the pupil as well. Going to go in with a grey. This is cool grey. I'm just going to use a little bit of this just to make the shape of the white of the eye so that you can distinguish it as a sphere. Just starting a tiny bit of shading in the corners the eyes, and the rest of the white of the eye I'm going to fill in with this blue. This is called blue silver, but any very pale layer of blue. So this just helps your catch light to stand out on its own as well. Just gives contrast. And take that same blue into the actual iris of the eye. So now I'm going to try and darken off the pupil without using any black, hopefully. Just layering up blues and reds. Just helps the area not look so flat if you use different colours instead of a solid black. And then using the same colour in these shadows is just going to help bring everything together. Just alter that catch light a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go in with a bit of a red. And you'll start to see how the layers can build up to be almost a black colour. Straight away that's deepened it by loads. Take a tiny bit of that into this outside edge of the iris. And into these brow shadows. And again, like we talked about in the skin tone lesson, it's all about defining the shape by light and shade. So you're preserving all your highlights on the skin around the brow bone and working into your darkest areas just to create the shape of the bone underneath. And just a bit of brown in that pupil. Still layering up. And again, just use the same colour in the surrounding area just to make it fit in. Tie it all together. sitting back from your work every now and then, you can just straight away spot areas that need to be worked up more. So I'm just needing a bit more blue in this blue eye. Just going to add it in gradually because you just don't want it to look like a block of solid colour. Usually eyes have these little, well, blue eyes, pale eyes like this have those little radiating lines. You can see the depth of that pupil colour now starting to get really dark. A tiny bit of this turquoisey blue. And take a bit into the whites as well. Just going to really get in some depth in these creases before I start work on the eyelashes. Just making sure all the background colour is exactly like I want it. Just taking a little bit of the skin colour down into the whites and shadows of the eyes, just again to harmonise the whole effect. I'm going to start just making some little almost vertical marks to suggest some eyelashes. I'm not quite happy with that pupil yet, it's not quite got the depth of colour I'm after, so another layer of red. So just going in now, completing the last few layers of this deep dark pupil. I'm going to start and introduce with a brown, dark brown, some of these eyelashes. When you're working on eyelashes, a common mistake is just to make a kind of straight line fan out from the eye, which always looks really fake. So it's just about making them natural, curved lines and trying to get a few that just cross. You don't have to exactly replicate what's on the photograph, just add in a few as you go around. I would say it's one of the things, if it's not clear on the photograph, if you've got quite a blurred photograph or the eyelashes just aren't very prominent on it, I would always add a few in because it just does give really good definition for the eyes. Tiny little ones down here. This baby's only got pale eyelashes, but I'm just going to emphasise just a few. Making them different lengths as well, that helps to make it look natural. Right, this is one of the few times when black actually does get used. Very fine lines. Can have a little look back, make sure there's nothing I've missed. Perhaps just a little bit more colour in the iris, I think. Red. Perhaps a deeper red. You'll be able to experiment, just find out which are the colours that go together the best to give these black effect. You want a nice creamy red that will go on over layers and layers of wax and still apply. Last little touch of blue. And I think the baby's eye's finished.